Founder FM. You're listening to Founder FM with your host, Graham Brown.
Hello and welcome to Founder FM. My name is Graham Brown. Today we're heading to Oslo, Norway, to meet a Norwegian entrepreneur, founder of Numbercom and Gran Canaria Bizweek. Welcome to the show, Hans Johansen. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you, Graham. Good to hear you.
Excellent, and great to hear you. You've got a great voice for radio. I'm going to add that I've seen you sing as well. You like the stage. Tell us, just before we get started, what's your singing career, your other job all about?
You know what? It's so much fun to do crooning and, to sing the Sinatra songs and all that. I do that as often as I can, but it doesn't really happen that often. That will be probably my next career.
But you like getting up on the stage, so to speak, not just to sing, but also, to get out there and promote yourself and promote your business. We'll talk about your business in a minute. We'll talk about some of your past projects, and we'll also talk about your conferences, your events that you're running. You've just come back from sunny Spain not so long ago. Right. You spent the winter down there.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, being an online entrepreneur is really often an introvert thing. You sit there with your laptop and you sort of work online stuff. But in my soul, I'm a very extrovert guy, and I do singing, and I can jump up on a stage with 2,000 people, and it doesn't bother me at all. I can do it in an instant. So it's really I think it's a little bit of a problem there for extroverts that the way we're working now is so much more into the computer. So you're limiting your talent by doing that in a way.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think for me as well, Hans, is that I'm an extrovert, but a lot of my business is online. So maybe that's why I'm doing this radio, so I can talk and meet people like you. Because otherwise, you're just sitting in front of a computer screen all day. Do you think that's why you run the conference down there in Gran Canaria?
Absolutely, I think it is. I've been somewhat needing a stage to be connecting people and to talk to people. We say that even explicitly at the Bizweek in Gran Canaria, that it is a networking event and it is about people and all that. But just talking to you now, I also realize that it's a good way to articulate the inner need that we're working too much online, too much digital. And that is a constraint we need to, I think if we're conscious about these things and try to compensate for it, we can do things.
So tell us a little bit about your event as well. You're down there in Gran Canaria, which is, often described as the best climate in the world. It's
absolutely
never too hot, never too cold. In winter, it's sunny. What's it all about? Just an excuse to get down into the sunshine in winter?
Well, I've been going down there in the wintertime for a week or two for some 12 years. And back in the day, I would just go down and stay in a hotel room and do some exercise and eat some healthy food and get energized and come back again. But I realized once that there are other people like me down here, and why don't we just get together and talk instead of each doing our own thing? So 4 years ago, I scrambled up some 15 people at the first business week, and we had some sessions in a hotel, and it grew from there. So, January this year, we were 130 people. It's grown to that, and it will grow much faster going forward now. And we're doing sessions for a whole week, and it's become a thing. You start something, and then you manage it, and you put some energy into it, but it also lives a life of its own.
That's interesting, because you already have a business as well. You must be incredibly busy. We'll talk about your startup in a minute, the business that you're currently running. How do you manage your time with all of this?
Well, the startup and what we do in Gran Canaria is quite tightly, I try to connect them in the sense that a lot of the people that I'm working with, I invite down there. And we really try to work with the people that attend the business week and bring down those people. So it is also very much a networking event and a team building event for my own company. So it's like they are disconnected in that sense. And now, of course, also when building the company and bringing on new team members and all that, I use the event down in Spain very consciously as a future point where specific things will happen and the team building sessions will go on.
Do you think you achieve things down there in Spain that you couldn't do being based in Oslo for most of your working week? Is there things that you can do? I mean, do you get more inspired? Do you just tell us a little bit about what the environment's like for you in terms of as an entrepreneur?
On a personal level, that is absolutely true, because I get very energized down there, and I'm able to make connections and all kinds of things happen, both that are planned, but sometimes just the serendipitous things that you never thought of that are happening might be just as important. So on a personal level, this is very much true. I don't know if we we disregard that personal level, if going on a yearly retreat and doing a team building exercise like that, I believe it's a good thing. But then I'm sure some people would say that, those things can be accomplished other ways but it's you have to justify it somehow also. So I'm a believer. I think it's good.
Right. Well, you enjoy it, right? So I think, what's interesting about your story, and we'll dig a bit more into that now, is that you've made a lot of lifestyle choices about your business, right? So,
yes.
If you're creating this event in Spain and building that, it's not a distraction away from your business. It's something that you actually enjoy. You've set yourself up with your business in a way that you can do this, right? Which is great. You've made some conscious decisions. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of decisions that you make or have made about your business and your career, which you think you've turned down opportunities, or you've decided not to do things because you specifically had a goal or a long-term vision of what you wanted as an entrepreneur?
Yes. And one of those things is I made a decision many years ago that I would only work on digital things. So I would not get involved in any physical products or any storefronts with physical locations or something like that. So I can literally do what I do from a laptop. This has become quite commonplace now, but when I made that decision 8-10 years ago, it was a little bit, it was ahead of its time. So that's important for me to be able to do that. Also, the fact that I'm planning ahead quite a bit. So, I'm working on my calendar quite a bit to make sure that I meet people in specific locations. And I'm not afraid of booking a meeting 4, 5, 6 months from now. And people get a little bit surprised when I ask about that. But then I know that I have a progression. So I attend quite a few events also around the world, especially in Europe. And I make sure to meet people at those events and make sure that I have progression on my projects at those events.
It's interesting, isn't it, how important meeting people offline is in this digital world. You seem to place a lot of value on offline contact. I know you said you're an entrepreneur, but you also prioritize, plan ahead for these meetings. I think we sometimes as entrepreneurs get lost in our digital worlds, don't we? I forget that, everything really comes down to meeting people face to face. So much of business is really done by trust, isn't it? Face to face and so on.
Right. And the laptop has a way of sucking you in.
Right.
It really does. And some, a friend of mine that I worked with, he used to make this joke way back, that one of his friends thought that the business was somehow in the computer. That he didn't want to go and meet people, because this is becoming more and more true. What he was joking about 15 years ago is now becoming true.
It's reality.
Business inside the computer.
There you go.
And if this trend goes on much further, I'm scared to think where it will end up.
Right. Well, I think you're doing the right thing, going out and meeting people. So let's talk about the business that you're currently running in the digital space, which is Numbercom. So that's a telecoms-based business. You've had quite an extensive telecoms career, which we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But tell us what exactly Numbercom is first.
Numbercom is a company I built out of a fundamental insight from a career in messaging. And the insight is this, that the identity is more important than whatever infrastructure you're running on, or back end, or hardware, or software, or whatever. The identities can be an email address, a chat address, a phone number, a real name, or the identity layer that connects all these services. Mm-hmm. And I realized also that the phone companies, the mobile network operators, they have all these number series. I mean, I've had my mobile phone number for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And a lot of other people have had similar experience. So my phone company, they know everyone that I ever called, and everyone who ever called me. And why aren't they building services around that? It's just an identity. They've changed the physical infrastructure multiple times. And I've had, in those 20 years, I've had 10, 15 different mobile phone handsets, and everything changes except for the identity. So the identity is the number, and that's where we need to focus and build services around. And I was asking the phone companies, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you building services around the phone numbers? And they just don't have a culture for that. So I realized that I need to be the one that takes the identity of the phone number seriously, build services around that, and then once the operators catch up to the value that's in there, I will have an amazing opportunity to do deals with them.
What kind of services can you build around a mobile phone number?
Well, the way we look at it, we want to build a suite of services that's similar to a Google account. That is file storage, a calendar, messaging, email, a number of sort of services that we get from Google or Microsoft through Hotmail, Outlook, and then Yahoo has their Yahoo Mail. We become accustomed to photo sharing and all that. And why aren't the telecom operators providing a suite like that based on the number? Some are doing parts of that, but we're doing it explicitly based on the number series.
Right. Okay. So what you're doing is you're building services around the phone number. So that would be the ID for these services, whether they're file storage or chat or anything like that, right? So it's an easy thing for a mobile operator to implement. They just have to have somebody in the company that's looking after mobile phone numbers or something like that. Is that the challenge that you face now?
Yes, there's a lot of things going on in the mobile operator world right now. And they seem to be excited about Internet of Things and a new series of IP numbers and all of that. And a little bit they're forgetting what they already have, which is the relationship they already have through all these customers. And that relationship really, the way I look at it, we look at it, is built around the mobile phone number that they have sort of given to that customer. So we say that the mobile number and the identity and really the relationship that goes over that identity is overlooked. It's the overlooked asset of the phone network operators.
Okay, so how do you go about creating this product? I'm curious to know what process you went through. You had this insight. What happens next?
Yes, I was able to fund the start of this company myself, and we've been working the what they call the soft money scene, the incentive programs here in Norway. You can get some public funding from some Norwegian research institutions and similar. I've been working that very consciously. So we have been receiving funding from like 3 or 4 different public institutions. And we have been able to build the company to a certain stage because I don't want to go to external financing before we have some data points to really build upon and to lay a plan for what's going to happen. I mean, you can raise money to make a plan, or you can raise money based on a plan that you have based on data points. And I want to get to that point before raise external money.
Because you'll have more leverage, more control over your company. Is that why?
Yes. And when things are clear, it also, I think you can strike a better deal. You agree on what's going to happen, and you have common ground.
I want to know how running this business has been similar or different to your first real big business that you created. And let's go back, nearly 16, 17 years to the last millennium, the end of 1999, when you set up Runbox, which was a mail hosted service, or a premium email hosting service, particularly strong on privacy, right? So if you can take us back to that time and the thoughts that were going through your head then, and sort of compare what it's like starting a business many years later in a similar market as well.
Yes, there is some there's some interesting parallels, because that company also was started on an insight that I had. I went to UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, back in 1996. And I arrived at Berkeley just the same summer as Hotmail launched. And I remember very well that I got this Hotmail account, and it solved a big problem for me, because back then I had a email account from my university in Sweden. And I even remember I had to dial up from the US to the ISP in Sweden to get my email. So
wow, that was expensive.
Right. And then Hotmail came along and solved that problem for me. And it was a huge revelation for me. But the problem was that Hotmail was bought by Microsoft, and they just kept, I think it was 2 megabytes or 3 or 4 megabytes in storage. So even though you had a Hotmail account, you still had to go on sort of managing your space and deleting emails and downloading emails. And I said to myself, how hard can it be to make a service that you can buy extra disk space and you can just keep all your email in the cloud? And this is quite revolutionary back then. Anyone who's been around for a while will remember that everyone was downloading all their email to whatever client they had, a laptop or whatever. And the concept of just leaving all your email in the cloud was, we didn't even have the word cloud. I used to call it the future of email is online storage. That's what I to claim. And I was absolutely right. When we introduced that, there was a huge need for that in the market, and we got a lot of traction in the beginning. But then came the .com crash, so we were never really able to fully capitalize on it. And in retrospect, I realized that the big error we did was that we didn't make it a freemium service. We went sort of all the way from a free service to a 30-day free trial, and then you had to decide whether or not you wanted to pay or not.
Right.
So we should have kept going as a freemium service, and who knows where that would have taken us. But it's also important to realize that this happened for us back in 2001. And there was some great uncertainty around funding. We were ahead of our times. The Norwegian funding market was undeveloped. I made the mistake of not going to a freemium model, but there was also no one in my environment that had the kind of experience to see that we should do a freemium model, because no one had that experience.
Right. Yeah.
So this is something I'm thinking about now, to not repeat, because we will face new challenges with Numbercom, and those challenges will require to make new decisions that you have to have a competence level to make. Of course, it won't be the same challenges as I've had in the past. It will be entirely new ones. And how do you make sure that you have the people on board so you make those right decisions?
Yes. How do you do that without hindsight? Because looking back, like you said, with the Runbox scenario, why didn't we do the freemium model? But at the time, freemium wasn't really established. Gmail was not Gmail as we know it now. I mean, Google wasn't really established at that time. Right. And then Facebook was 2006. So all those sort of what we now assume to be normal social media free services like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they came years after Runbox. So nobody really knew that freemium was an option back then. I mean, I think Chris Anderson, when he wrote about free and in Wired, that wasn't until 2005, 2006, or maybe even after, I can't remember.
Right.
So it would have been impossible to know that that was the right thing to do unless, you were around the Google guys at the time. So how do you then plan with what you're doing now at Numbercom in terms of making the right decisions? I'm just curious because, how do you avoid the mistakes that you can't see?
Yes, and we will face new issues similar to this. We're going to virtual reality, we're going into artificial intelligence and all of that, and all of those things will at some point require similar kinds of decisions. You either go in or you don't. But with Numbercom, I've taken some conscious decisions. And the interesting thing about working with the mobile numbers, as we do with Numbercom, is that the numbers are somewhat inert, and it's a legacy system that's been around for a very long time, and we believe it will be around for a very long time still. So you can say, in a sense, that we're innovating on something old and something that's somewhat fixed. The numbers is a fixed thing. So it's I'm saying that the time is actually working for us. If you are competing as a social network against Facebook, then every day Facebook is getting ahead of you, and the time is sort of working against you. But for Numbercom, I see that there will be a renaissance in the value of the mobile phone numbers, and because it's regulated, it's not going to disappear.
So how do you maintain confidence in your decision? Because I imagine, Hans, when you have meetings with people and you start telling them that you're seeing a future of numbers, mobile phone numbers as IDs, I can hear people think, why are we talking about mobile phone numbers? This is 2016 or 2017. I imagine a lot of people doubt what you're doing. How does that affect you? Does that sort of empower you to try harder, or do sometimes you sort of scratch your head and think, okay, we need to really think this through?
I believe I look at it as there's two kinds of people in the world. There are the ones that get what Numbercom is doing and the ones that don't. So partly we look upon it that, and there are some people who really get it, and there are some people who are very much against it and say that this is hopeless, the numbers are going out. And as long as there are some people who get it and that I have these really meaningful conversations with, then my faith is strengthened. But I also have a very strong internal faith in my fundamental insight of the value of the numbers. And even though some people are sort of saying what might be taken as a discouraging thing, that numbers are going out and all that, I'm so confident in my insight based on some really fundamental things, that the numbers are regulated, the numbers are an ID set, the potentiality of the numbers have not yet been taken out. So even though people might not see my vision, I also realize that they don't fully understand the depth of the situation and the depth of the case. And I don't really try to spend a lot of time persuading people or turning people around. I don't expect them of that. I'd rather just close that conversation and move on to find the people that do get it.
That's good advice. Sell to the sold. Don't waste your energies on the people who need converting, right?
Right.
So how do you know that your insight is valid? Or how do I put it? How do you validate your insight? Because the danger for every entrepreneur is confidence in the idea or overconfidence. So how do you know that is the right thing to do? If you look back at Runbox, you had 1 million trial users, right? So you had a lot of feedback. You understood what people liked and didn't like, and so on. How does it work with Numbercom? How do you know that you're not going to back an idea which actually people don't like?
The way I look at that is I'm confident that we're onto something big, and I might be a bit stubborn there, but I rather look at it as will I be able to raise enough money and resources in order to manifest the vision that I'm confident I have. So maybe I should question my fundamental strategy more, but I really don't. I'm so convinced that I'm right. What I worry more about is what if, we need to, what if our first attempt at fixing this and manifesting our solutions does not work. So we sort of have to go back and make it one more go, and we have to raise new money and all that. So that's more how I look at it. The problem is that sometimes entrepreneurs take on problems that are too big for them to swallow in one bite. I see it more as that kind of problem. So maybe sometimes you need to chop up the problem and work on a subset of the problem you're fixing. I think sometimes that can be a good exercise to think about. And we have in Numbercom been very conscious about removing some of the things that we wanted to do initially and try to have a minimum viable product going forward.
So how do you manage your day on a day-to-day basis if you're involved in developing the product? I guess you're not coding the product, you've got a team doing that, but you're working with this team. You're also conscious of raising money. You're also conscious of finding people, especially in the operators, the mobile phone companies who are interested in this product. That's a lot of different roles wrapped into one. What's a typical day like for you? Oh yeah, and by the way, you've also got the event in Spain, so not to forget, you've got a lot on the go.
Well, a typical day is a lot of working in front of the computer, working on paperwork and filing various stuff and all of that. So when it comes to the development of the program or the software itself, we're working in sprints and we're using a lot of the state-of-the-art tools for long-term planning. So I'm right now thinking about and working on things that plans for what the developers will be doing in July and August. So we have a number of sprints coming up ahead of us. My main sort of concern and what I think about is the funding. And I also believe that is perhaps the biggest role of the entrepreneur and the CEO of a startup, to make sure that we have the funding in place and to give the rest of the team the signal and the faith that the funding is there so that they don't have to worry about that.
So how would you typically go about that? Are you raising seed funding? Are you looking at angel investors or institutional funding? What do you do?
We are continuing to work with various Norwegian and foreign research institutions for grants. So we're applying to for grants in those places, and having a little bit of a high-end dialogue with multiple telcos. I mean, we were in Barcelona just recently. We were selected for the 4 Years From Now awards, where we got in touch with several large telcos, and even sometimes at very high executive levels. And then you have to bring those interests and those connections into a setting where you can actually get some funding from them, which is a totally different kind of discussion. So I'm trying to manage talking to business developers and managers, the telcos, on a high level, and then to make sure that conversation is anchored towards the people that can provide us the money. So a lot of times it's getting other people to talk to each other.
So I imagine there's a lot of different roles in that as well, isn't it? Because you have this role which is like what we said at the beginning, the singing role, where you get up on stage, you present at Barcelona, you got to the semi-finals, right, of the competition, the pitch competition. So there's very much that face of the business, and then you're managing a team, and then you're doing the paperwork and so on. Is that something which you see yourself doing in the future as the company grows, or do you have a conscious decision that you're going to do more one type of this role and less of the other?
It's definitely our plan to raise money in the future, and my role will be different. But in the sort of short to medium term, we are working towards a point where we see the application taking off and getting those proof points. So, and that is somewhat binary. It either happens or it doesn't happen. And I think even though I'm not so that conscious about it, I really hope, like I did I did the accounting and the books in Runbox for the first few years, but that was one of the first things once we had revenue to cover that I had other people doing. And that's just, that will just come naturally, I think. I haven't even thought about it. For me, it's just like such a natural thing that once we have revenue and we're profitable, then we'll take in people to do all those roles.
But do you think are you the kind of CEO who will be actively running the business in years to come? Or do you see us, because this is the challenge that faces a lot of CEO founders, isn't it? Is that sometimes some founders are really good at building a product and getting the product to scale, and then stepping back and let somebody else take over. Some founders, can take it all the way, like a Zuckerberg or, one of the Google boys, for example.
I believe I'm the sort of the evangelist role might be more my role once we get to a certain level. In Runbox, it was partly that, but in a small company, and especially if you're struggling, then you have to take on all these roles yourself. So that just goes to show again that you you need to grow. You need to get up to those levels where you can separate the roles and really play on people's strengths. Because again, I mean, like, think of anything more introvert than doing the books. It's probably the most introvert thing you can possibly do. And I'm really not cut out to do it. But as an entrepreneur, you have to do it.
Exactly. It's great to learn and understand what it's about, but it shouldn't be something that you're doing long term, is it? That's a sign you're not growing.
And that is also part of the motivation to get to a level where you don't have to do that anymore.
Right. What about young entrepreneurs coming through? You must have a thriving entrepreneurial scene in Norway, whole of Europe. A lot of young people starting their own businesses. Do you see young people coming into business with some ideas that you think, that's not true, or, making mistakes which you've made, which they could avoid? Do you see sort of any difference with the new generation of entrepreneurs to yourself? Just curious to see how you see it.
I see a lot of things coming up that are sort of very obvious ideas. And, one like totally obvious idea is like students making a website for swapping used school books.
Right.
It's such an obvious idea, and I'm sure that idea has been tried in projects in every single country in Europe and every state in the US or whatever. So I'm hoping to see more project that goes beyond the obvious, and lifts them up to a higher level. We also talk a lot about that in Spain and at the Business Week, that a lot of the way that this is talked about is that the quality of the projects is too low. That's how the sort of it's framed. And I wish that I wish to see that entrepreneurs and were to talk more about this before they sort of head out and start pitching and all that. And then they also do some more planning of what they really want to do with their businesses. Do they want a lifestyle business, or do they want to raise money and go for an IPO, or where do they want to go? I see in retrospect that with Runbox that it wasn't quite clear, and it changed over the years what kind of business it was. We went out hard and we raised money from more than, I think we had 100 shareholders. And that was working well in the .com boom, but then, we got the .com bust, and then everything changed, but you still had all those shareholders. How do you do that? So I wish entrepreneurs would talk about that and be more conscious about what they want before they jump into it.
Do you think a lot of young entrepreneurs today don't know what they want? They just want to start a business. They don't think about the consequences, the lifestyle choices, and so on.
Yeah, I think that that's very much true. And the fact that everything takes much longer than you planned, and that you will struggle, and that you will have really high highs and low lows, and how do you take yourself through that? There's a lot of knowledge that you have to acquire the hard way, or have someone tell you. But then again, the stubborn entrepreneur that doesn't listen to advice, that's also sort of almost an ideal, that you also want that. So to find that balance is very hard.
And as for yourself, you've learned a few things. Have you changed the way that you do business now, like compared to Hans 16, 17 years ago starting out? Are you a different entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. But then again, you do see some patterns. And also, of course, once you've gone through some processes and some startups, and you have a set of experiences like I do now, then again, of course, you're a little bit caught in those experiences. So you try to build from what you learned in a certain specific sequence of experiences. So what I'm doing now with Numbercom is explicitly based on experiences. I couldn't. Maybe I should do something completely different, but then you're caught in your own footsteps in a way.
Exactly. But you're probably doing it with more, let's say, you understand the process now. You understand that this takes time. You understand that, you don't have the sort of impatience of the younger entrepreneur, right? So I think that kind of helps, doesn't it? Because, it's the guy that can wait and make things happen and sit things out that really, wins when it comes to things like growing a business or, finding funding.
Yes, and another important aspect of that is that you got to differentiate between your life and your business. Those are two different things. And that's much easier to do when you have a job for a big company. Then you're on the job, and then you're at home, and you have your own private economy, your own money, and then there's the corporate money and the job money, and those are totally different things. And you buy an apartment and you pay down on the mortgage, and that's totally different from what's going on at your workplace. But when you're an entrepreneur, all those things get mixed up, and all of a sudden you don't know what is what anymore, and you use your apartment as a guarantee for a loan in the bank to fund your business, and all of a sudden those things get mixed up. It's very hard to avoid that.
Exactly.
But as you grow older and you see the need for separating that, I think you also maybe get better at being conscious about that. So that's my advice to young entrepreneurs, to try to. You should really not mix sort of. Having a home office is not really a good idea because you bring of the startup into your house, and it's not necessarily good.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and something. I think it's more of a mental thing as well, isn't it? It's that going out to go to work somewhere. It doesn't have to be an office in the city. You could go to Starbucks, or you could go to some coffee shop or whatever, or some co-working space. But just the whole process of getting out as well, beyond the economic impact of mixing home and work, that kind of thing. But just having that line and separating between your business and your private life. That's why you have to get down to Spain once in a while, isn't it? Right? That's a good point, to get down there and decompress and think about these things.
Yeah, partly. And I think you can differentiate in different offices that you have. Maybe even have two cell phones, two smartphones, one for work and one for private. And you actually at 5 o'clock you switch. You pick up the other phone to really consciously work on that. And of course, when I go down to Spain and I do the conference there, I'm caught in my own trap again, because that is a mix of business and pleasure, and so there you go again. But then at least when I do the things in Spain, that is a concept that's not incorporated with lots of other people, and there's no banks involved or stuff like that. I try to keep it really simple. So because the complexity of handling institutions, like a company is an institution, and you have shareholders and you have a board of directors and employees and paperwork and back and forth. Sometimes people underestimate the kind of work that's involved with the complexity of something like that. Yeah,
exactly. Well, Hans, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. And thank you for sharing with us your perspective on business and life. And
thank you. It's always good to talk.
It is, and the advice that you offer is always useful. So, where do we find out more about you and also your events?
The event, the Gran Canaria Business Week, the Biz Week, as we call it, BIZZWEEK.com. is our annual event. And if anyone want to catch up with me and have a conversation and a coffee and something like that, that's the place to go. We have time to catch up with everyone when we go down there. That's a part of the point of doing a week-long event. And I do get into a lot of fascinating conversations down there with people that come down there to solve issues that have on their mind that they can't really find anywhere else to discuss. And it's usually in the crossroads of the business and the private sphere. So, dealing with those two spheres, that's where people are having issues, because you can't bring it up with the board of directors of your company, and you can't bring it up with your girlfriend or your wife. You're sort of stuck somewhere in between. So the Biz Week is there. I'm Hans Johansen. It's easy to Google me up, and our startup Numbercom, Numbercom.com is about to launch now, and you'll see it in the news, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Well, Hans, thank you for coming on and sharing with us. We wish you all the best. And if you want to head down to Hans's event, get down to Gran Canaria. A bit of sunshine, to hang out with Hans and his people.
Every first week of January every year.
That's fantastic timing, right? For all Europeans and beyond who want a bit of sun and inspiration. Hans, I wish you all the best. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Founder FM, voice of the entrepreneur. Find out more at www.founderfm.com.